Hey guys, welcome back to Apologetics. Pumped to join us today to have Scott Clifton. We're going to be talking about something, theology, atheism, theism. We didn't really plan this out. So Scott, thank you for joining me. How you doing?
I'm great, man. How are you?
I'm good. I'm pumped for this conversation and it's going to be fun. I'm just excited to kind of see where we go. So to get things started, Scott, do you want to talk a little bit about like who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I'm let's start here. Just to keep these expectations real low.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a philosopher. Philosophy is just something I'm interested in, philosophy of religion and theology and stuff like that. I have no formal education in this area. Everything that I know or talk about or like to think about is just a product of osmosis from conversations with people much smarter than I, or knowledgeable. I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out of high school because I wanted to be an actor. I grew up in LA. I was born and raised in LA. And acting is kind of just like, part of the culture here. It's like it's an available job that you can have if you if you try hard enough. And so yeah, since I was young, I wanted to be an actor, and that's kind of what I ended up doing. I got very, very lucky and was able to sustain a career doing that. I work on since I've been about 18. I'm almost 40 now, and since I was 18, I've been doing soap operas. So I'm a by profession, I am a contract actor on an American soap opera, and it's on CBS. It's called The Bold and the Beautiful, and that's my day job. But I think the love of my life is thinking about these kinds of questions, and I just really enjoy it. I don't know how much detail you want to get into about how I got to this state, or why I care
So
about
let's
these things.
let's let's just start with this. So just
Yeah.
get all my like unsophisticatedness out right now. In soap operas, do you like sing? Is that what you, I feel like that's what I heard what you do in soap operas. Am I right? Like, is that is it like singing TV?
Oh, no. Soap operas are serialized television shows. It's like an hour every day. Like so,
Mm-hmm.
soap operas are an episodic show where it's Monday through Friday. There's an episode every single day, and it's just an ongoing story. Like it never stops. So there's no seasons. There's no end ever. It just go. And so the soap opera I've been on, that I'm on now, has been going for something like 35 years. And that's the youngest soap opera. So the oldest soap opera, which is now canceled, was I believe it was Guiding Light, and that started in like the 1920s on radio, right? And they just keep on going. The cast changes, the storylines change. One storyline resolves, and then another one begins. But it's just a TV show like anything else, like Stranger Things or Game of Thrones, except really, really, really low budget, very, very efficiency minded. We're
Mm-hmm.
basically doing a play every single day with
Mm-hmm.
no prep. That's kind of the skill set there. So and yeah, a lot of Americans and a lot of people across the world watch these. They're called telenovelas in Spanish speaking countries, but it's the same thing. It's just
Mm-hmm.
a long running serialized television show.
Okay, I got you. Well, in addition to being an actor, you also are an atheist, right? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's start with this. Like, obviously, you have like a big YouTube channel, and you do a lot of like you're interested in philosophy, religion. Like, what led you like where you are today, in your current mind of July 28th, 2022, where you're an atheist talking to me, a Christian. So, just tell me a little bit about your journey.
Right, right. I shouldn't say it wouldn't be right to say that I have a big YouTube channel. I think there was a time like back in like a
Hmm.
decade ago when I was kind of one of the big YouTube sort of players. I rarely use YouTube anymore. I'm prolific on Twitter. And I still like to have these, Twitter presents opportunities like this where I get to
Hmm.
have kind of live dialogues and things like that. So I get to sort of stay in that world. But I've really neglected the YouTube channel. Okay, that said, I as I said, I grew up in Southern California, which is mostly, sort of godless liberal civilization.
Hmm.
But there are pockets of conservatism and religiosity in California. And so when I was around 8 or 9 years old. I don't know if you've heard of it, but there was a famous earthquake, the Northridge quake of '94, completely destroyed our home. And we had to move out of the San Fernando Valley, which is a very kind of secular, liberal place. And we moved to this small town that was predominantly conservative evangelical Christian, right? And so in order to fit in, all of my new friends at this place, or at least potential friends, were evangelical Christians, and they had not met someone like me. So to be clear, I should say my my family was philosophically inclined. We had lots of deep dinner conversations and stuff like that, but they were not religious in any way, and they weren't theistic in any way. And in fact, I think in my young naivete, like as a 6, 7-year-old, I thought of God and heaven similarly to Santa Claus. I'm not actually making that comparison. I'm just saying that in my mind, I viewed them as like something that parents would, tell their kids about in order to keep them in line. And then you kind of grew out of it. And then when we moved to this town, I realized that no, this is something very meaningful to people. This is something very important to people. This is not like Santa Claus. Belief in God is something that most of the world takes very seriously, and I've been just kind of isolated from that. And so I became, being absorbed into this new community, and not wanting to be a social pariah, and not wanting to be totally ostracized. I sort of allowed myself to become a practice dummy for apologetics and evangelism. And so in order to kind of be a part of that community, I had to go to church, and I went to the Christian summer camp, and I did the youth groups, and I did all the things, and all of my friends and their parents were, constantly trying to get me to see the light. But I was, I really had no knowledge about, so people were, I was handed Case for Christ and Evidence That Demands a Verdict and lots of Bibles, and I think that pressure sort of forced me to have to start having my own kind of apologetic, and I mean that in the literal sense of having an answer for a lot of the questions that I was being asked, which kind of caused me to start thinking about this stuff. And really, Christianity, or Christian apologetics was just a gateway drug for philosophy in general. And as I got older and more, I understood the subject matter better, my interests sort of broadened from, does God exist? Did Jesus rise from the grave? To, do we have free will? And what is morality? And, what explains consciousness? And so it just sort of, there was a kind of ripple effect there. And that's how I got to where I am today. I hope that was concise enough. Sorry.
I think that was great, Scott. And one of the things I appreciate about you, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, is thinking about just like in the beginning, you talked about how like you're not a professional philosopher, like neither am I. We're just dudes that have day jobs that like really think these questions are super interesting. They're super like worth thinking about. And I love that. Like I remember when I live in Virginia, but my family's all up in PA, so I was making a trip down to Virginia once. And I listened to like you and Emerson's like 4.5 like gazillion hour conversation on free will and determinism and all that stuff. And I was like, this guy seems pretty cool. We should have a conversation about something.
Oh, nice.
So that was kind of how that came about. But like to me, like it just seems like it's an important thing to bring up here. Just like it's okay to like as we go, like your journey is your journey, and like my journey is my journey. And I don't know where I'm getting it all with this, but I wanted to bring it up because I appreciate just how open you are with like not saying like, hey, I have all the answers, like, hey, let's explore and think about these things.
Nice. Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. So how have your views changed over time? Like as you were talking, I was scrolling through like your YouTube channel where I can see like 12 years ago where you're talking about like tag Matt, you're it, prologue. I'm just reading off my screen right here.
Oh my God.
So like how have your views changed like when you first got into like, philosophy, religion, and counter apologetics and all these things to like where you are today? Like what would have been some like the big steps in your journey?
That's a good question. I get a little embarrassed when it comes to questions like this because I wish that I could say that I've changed my mind about much bigger things than the things I actually have changed my mind about. Mm-hmm. I think when I first started, I may have sounded a lot more like a kind of new atheist type. I think I I probably defined atheism as a lack of belief, and I kind of visited all those sort of talking points. I think I maybe, well, when I was much, much younger, it's just about the sort of level of conversation you're able to have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, when I first started getting into this stuff, I just, there's a popular level, like there's, what would somebody, what's the most sophisticated possible response to somebody like Ray Comfort, right? I mean, that was the level at which I think I was operating, where there's not a lot of nuance. I think my style has changed. I think I've become much more open about being wrong. I think I'm much more comfortable acknowledging the things that I don't have answers for. I think I'm much more comfortable. Like, for example, one area where I may part with a lot of other atheists is I think consciousness is going to remain a mystery. It's not something that you can just explain by pointing to the brain. I think these are questions that should keep us up at night, and I'm totally comfortable saying that, whereas I might not have been, 10 years ago. Free will. I mean, I think early on when I talked about free will, I would have considered myself a compatibilist or something like that, and then my views have changed on there. My views have changed on morality a little bit. A lot of it, though, I think a lot of the changes I've gone through have been much more of a process of refinement than, which is still due to external pressures, right? I mean, it's still, me being called out for just not being very precise in my thinking, and me having to become more and more precise. I don't know if there are any huge questions, though, that I've changed, like really fundamentally changed my mind about, like, does God exist? None of, yeah. And I wish I could say that, because I think that's a really, really valuable part of the human experience, is kind of having your entire worldview, pulled out from under you like a rug. I think that people who have gone from atheist to Christian, or Christian to atheist, or any variation thereof, have something really special in their experience that I don't have, and I may never get to have. And so, that kind of bums me out.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things that I always heard, like, you were in youth group where you'd hear like these crazy testimonies, and they'd be like, but like your testimony is just as important. And like, I think you could say the same thing about like you or me, like, like I've been a Christian most of my life. Like I had like very intense doubts. It was, and like, you've been like on the other side of the fence for your life, but like your story is you, like you're the Scott Clifton. Like no one else can be like, oh, I'm Scott Clifton, I got this story to say. So there's something to just like you and your journey, and I respect that.
Yeah,
so.
Sure. But I also think there's a kind of like dialectical credibility that comes along with. Yeah, I think I mentioned this in my conversation with Emerson, where because he used to identify as a hard determinist, like I currently identify, that he comes with a kind of credibility where he gets to say, listen, man, I understand your view, right? I've been where you are. I know what it's like to be you and have the propositional attitudes that you have, and feel how compelling they are. So I know everything you know, and I still don't agree with you. What does that tell you, right? I don't get to I can't say that to, if I'm having a disagreement with a Christian who says you'll just never know what it's like to feel the love of Christ. That's what you're missing here. I don't get to say, I do know what that feels like. I just know that that's not what I think that actually was now. I think having come from a religious tradition gives you a bit of a better, a more visceral understanding. Yes, I can talk about the arguments, and I can talk about the the tenets of the belief in a sort of intellectual way, but that real personal understanding of having, of any view that you used to have that don't have anymore, I think that's valuable. That's all I'm really saying.
Well, I think I agree with you then. Like there's something valuable in like knowing what it's actually like to be in like your dialectical partner, like their shoes. So I think there's something super valuable and important about that. So where do we want to take this? I think one of the things that stood out to me, Scott, when you were talking, was thinking about the idea of just like how our journeys have changed. Like I think about me, like when I first got exposed to like philosophy and apologetics and all this stuff, I was like, like kind of the same boat as you, just opposite team. Like it was like senior year of high school. It's like 4 years ago. And it was like, I remember like I had this, like one of the first videos I ever did was like the big brain proves God in 2 minutes. Like whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. The BGV theorem proves that there's like a past finite boundary. Like it's over. And I was just like, I come back to that. I'm not like, oh, he's an idiot, but I'm just like, oh, it's so much deeper than that. And like maybe that's true, but it's just like it's appreciating like how complex all these issues are, and like no matter what we talk about or like what you talk about, there's so many layers to like any question in like philosophy or philosophy of religion, which to me is like makes it so interesting. Like it's not like I'm gonna like get this all figured out one day. I'm gonna open one book and be like, oh, there's all my answers. I'm done. Goodbye. So like that's not how it works. So I think that's super cool.
Yeah, I feel that way about I think like the Kalam cosmological argument is a really good example of that. I mean, you alluded to it, but it's so deceptively simple. I mean, it just seems the whole the elevator pitch for the Kalam cosmological argument is, look, it's two super intuitive premises and a very simple conclusion that follows from them. Like it's like foolproof, right? I mean, it's just like right there. Like who could deny these things? And that's what's so great about it, because the minute you like pop the hood and start like looking, through the engine and taking parts out, and you realize, I mean, it's not a real in-depth conversation, a disagreement about the Kalam cosmological argument. It's going to have to do with epistemology and mereology and metaphysics and science, and it forces you to have all these free will, even, and the nature of time, and there's so many things that have to be discussed, in order to move the conversational needle on that argument, which I think is cool about it.
Yeah. So maybe then, Scott, I'd be curious. You talked about in the beginning, like your journey, like leading you to like you kind of were like always not a believer, but then you like exposed like apologetics and things like this, and you kind of like had your own responses that you developed over time. But why, like now, like why are you an atheist? Like, is it because you think like arguments for God fail? Do you think there's things like the problem of evil or like hiddenness that really push you towards atheism? Like when you look at where you're at right now, like what kind of leads you to come to the conclusions that you do?
Yeah, I think that on a I don't know if emotional is the right word. I mean, in some sense, emotions and rationality are all coming from the same parts of the brain. You can't really separate them. But I think on a personal level, what's the most compelling atheistic argument is the problem of non-belief, or sometimes called divine hiddenness. And I think for me, the reason that's compelling is because I grew up as an atheist. I grew up without any kind of belief in God, and so it seems really, really intuitive to me that that if a God existed, we would know it. We would all just know that, in the same way that if my mom exists, I would know that, right? Like I have a mom, I know my mom. Like why on earth would I not know that my mom exists, right? If she created me, it's that kind of thing. I used to be a little dismissive of the problem of evil, but I think the more I understand that it's a family of problems, the more compelling I think it is, like the problem of animal suffering, or the problem of teleological evil, the problem of natural evil. I think these are all like really, really interesting. They give a lot of evidential weight, I think, against theism. But yeah, I mean, and we can, and also I there's no particular argument from contingency or Kalam argument or moral arguments. I mean, I don't, at least what I can say is that I know what it is I don't buy about them, and I can articulate that, right? So on the one hand, yes, it's that theistic arguments aren't compelling to me, and I can be kind of precise in why I don't think they're compelling. And then on the other hand, problem of evil is interesting, but for me, at the end of the day, it's going to be the problem of non-belief. I think that it makes no sense to me that if God exists, we live in a universe where that wouldn't just be a kind of known thing for reasons that are articulated within that argument, of course.
Yeah, well, maybe we can chat about that in a minute. But I'm curious,
Sure.
like, so Scott, in your view, do you see arguments like, so obviously Craig's a great example to kind of get things out there. Like, if you ever like watch a Craig debate, or like you debated Craig on Cameron's channel, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, he'll kind of bring forth like an argument, like whether it's like a kalam or like fine tuning or whatever. And it's like this kind of like logically and inescapably leads to the conclusion that God exists, because he has like his premises, and from the premises follows that God exists. So would you follow like even like with atheological arguments? Do you think that's a better route? Or like for me personally, like I'm more attracted to like maybe like a Draper or Swinburnian approach, where they're kind of like arguments are more like evidential chips, where like this may push you a little bit towards one side or a lot more to one side. Like, where do you land on that?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I think I had been kind of having this sort of feeling, and once I heard Graham Oppie talk about it, saying like, deductive arguments, it's kind of turtles all the way down, right? You don't buy the argument, but then you look at the premises, and how could you accept these? How could you not? Or how could you accept these premises and not accept the conclusion? Well, yeah, I don't accept these premises. Okay, well, here's an argument for the premises. Okay, well, here's an argument for a premise in the argument for the premises. And clearly, it's like I said, it's going to be a kind of turtles all the way down situation where there's just going to be a fundamental disagreement that you're not going to get past deductively. And so I think Oppie's idea that what we really should be comparing here is I think what he calls theoretical virtues, where you're kind of looking at the big picture of both worldviews and seeing what explains the most at the least cost. And yeah, I agree that that's I think a better way of thinking about this.
So maybe then let's talk about like the argument from non-belief for a little bit. And I don't see this as at all like a debate. I'm actually going to get my friend in here. He's going to like for you in a debate in like 5 minutes. He's just downstairs, so I'm going to call him up in a minute. But like what pushes, like I'd be curious to like hear what you say, and maybe if I have anything and like what the argument from non-belief, you talked about this, like what really pushes this towards you, like towards like atheism for you?
It's not, so okay. So the more specific the theistic belief for me, the more powerful the argument from non-belief is going to be, right? But if you're talking about a sort of really, really general theism, like there's a creator, omnipotent, omniscient, morally perfect, I don't know, but there's some kind of, I'm actually not great with what that's called. Is that called, what's the opposite of theistic personalism? Is it
like deism, where there's like an impersonal God?
No, I'm not going that far. But open theism, skeptical theism, is that what it is? It's where you just really can't know anything about God. I'm totally
skeptical theists would say. No, you're good.
Yeah.
I mean, skeptical theists would say like we don't really know like God's reasons for evil, and then it's gonna be hard to like stop it there. So that's why I don't like skeptical.
Okay, that's a little different from what I'm talking about. This is why I don't read enough philosophy is the problem. I can like come to this stuff, and then somebody tells me after the fact, like, oh, that's what Draper says, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So if you believe in hell, if you believe especially in like an eternal conscious torment version of hell, then the argument from non-belief is like almost unassailable as far as I'm concerned, right? In the context of Christianity, right? If you believe in some other version of hell where, hell is more like, annihilation or something, I guess maybe annihilationism is different from some version of hell. But anyway, the more, if you give up on that altogether, so if you have a version of Christianity where it's like universalism, where everybody gets saved no matter what, then the argument from non-belief becomes even less powerful. And then if you don't believe in an afterlife at all, you're just talking about theism in general, then non-belief becomes even less powerful. So I think it's that particular problem scales with how specific your theism gets. So I don't know your views on hell or soteriology or any of that, but I think the conversation changes depending on who you're talking to. So
yeah, no, it's hard. I was talking with Emerson about this, and it's up on my channel for anyone that's curious about it. We talked about this like a few weeks ago because he's been like thinking about like Christian universalism a lot. So we talked about like his devil's advocate case for God. Then we got into like plausible forms of Christianity. So I guess for me, I don't know. I mean, I definitely think like a version of Christianity where you have like everyone that doesn't adhere to the intellectual proposition that like God raised Jesus from the dead and something like that, like they're all going to hell. Like that's really hard for me to just believe for similar reason that you would. Obviously, there's different versions of like eternal conscious torment. Like it's really hard for me, and I lean towards like annihilationism, like a version of like where Lewis in The Great Divorce talks about how like I see that as possible. So that's one thing. So like I'd lean towards like annihilationism, but then I'm also like I'm a hopeful universalist. Like I don't know, like why would you want people to go to hell? Like that just sounds terrible. So like I'm not gonna hope for not universalism, even though like I'm like there's like very like theological reason that make it hard for me to accept that. But for me, like one of the things that helps me think about like non-belief is the idea of like, do you actually like have to have in like your intellectual inventory, like when you get to heaven, like you're gonna get like a theology test. Like, did you believe that like in like the incarnation, the Trinity, things like this? And to me, it seems hard to think like you have to pass a theology test to get into heaven. Not to say you can just believe whatever on earth you want. But I think Lewis puts this really well. So are you familiar with like The Last Battle where Lewis talks with Tash and things like that?
I think I had to read that in school, but I don't remember it.
Okay. So I'll just summarize it just very briefly because it helps me think about like when I'm like, what's a plausible version of trying to explain like where you could have like Christian exclusivism, like which is something I'd hold to, but also try to make sense of like people that are going to never hear the gospel or like hear of Christianity or things like this. So it's the end of The Last Battle, C.S. Lewis, and there's this dude named Tash, or maybe the god is Tash. It's the god this guy is serving is Tash. He's not the right one. So it's the end of the day, and there's like this soldier, this dude, and he's like, "Oh shoot, I just spent my whole life serving Tash. I'm kind of screwed now, because Aslan, he's the true one, and I'm going to hell." And what Aslan says is,
I think I know this. It's something like you're kind of, if your heart's in the right place, but you are serving Aslan, even if you don't realize it intellectually that you are serving Aslan. It's that's the sentiment there, right?
Yeah, so the guy, he's talking to Aslan, and he says, "I said, Lord, thou knowest how much I understand, but I said also, for the truth constrained me, yet I've been seeking Tash all my life." And then Aslan says, "Beloved," says the glorious one, "until that desire has been for me, thou wouldst not have sought so long and so truly, for all find what they truly seek." And there's another thing where like what you did for Tash, I count as what you did for me. So if you're seeking truly, like you're gonna find it, and even if you don't have like the intellectual proposition, you're doing like you're gonna be saved because you're actually seeking truth and doing something there. So all that to say, like for me, like that's a more plausible form of Christianity that I think like you can still have like Christian exclusivism and things that like your evangelical wants to have, but then also like try to make sense of like a lot of people never hear in like Christianity or things like that.
Yeah, I certainly agree. That's a more plausible version of Christianity. I think that there's another element here, though, which is this idea that, so on one level, we can talk about the idea that in a lot of versions of Christianity, people are punished for failing to believe certain propositions, or at least that's not the, I mean, the answer to that is that no, they're not punished for failing to believe those propositions. They're punished for their sins. And because they don't, because they aren't, but they can't be saved if they don't acknowledge their sins. And so, but at the end of the day, certain propositional beliefs are necessary for salvation. And if you don't have those beliefs, then you're punished. So there's that conversation. There's that problem of non-belief, the kind of morality problem of non-belief, where it's unjust, right? Where you have people being punished for a failure to be convinced by certain propositions, ultimately. That's not, so the problem in the version of Christianity that you're describing is not a moral problem if it's the case that if you have something like universalism or like in what C.S. Lewis is saying, that as long as, even if you're a Hindu, but you sincerely care about being a good person and seeking the truth, and that counts, Well,
I wouldn't, sorry to interrupt, but I wouldn't say it's like just being a good person. It's like actually just like trying to serve and follow God. Cause evangelical distinctions between like good persons, like you're not saved, that, or things like that. Like someone like, I think Lewis is getting at someone that's actually like genuinely trying to like serve God and follow the truth to the best of their ability. So sorry to interrupt.
Oh, okay. Well then that would still be a problem for me, right? Because I don't believe in any God. So I'm not trying to serve a God. I'm trying to serve principles. I'm trying to serve other people. I'm trying to serve, my country or whatever. But I'm not doing this for God. I'm not doing this with God in mind. Morality to me is totally divorced from theism. So the question there would be, okay, am I saved, or not? And if I'm not saved, then that's a bit of a problem, because at the end of the day, the reason, what was necessary for my salvation was a certain propositional belief in some kind of God, that I failed to be compelled by, which I think is unjust for somebody to maybe not be punished, but not be rewarded for that. So like, even if I were like annihilated and everybody else went to heaven, that still seems unjust. And then the other, I mean, even on a like more mellower tone, just the idea that if you view God as a being that created us and loves us and wants a relationship with us, take punishment out of the picture altogether, that's still a problem, right? Imagine my mom, creating me, loving me, and wanting a relationship with me, and somehow, and then imagine her having, infinite power and infinite resources, and then imagine her not letting me know that me living my entire life without knowing she exists. That's not love, right? That's not someone who wants a relationship with me. That it's almost easier to assume my mom doesn't exist than to assume she exists, but she's purposely doing this for, whatever reason you might want to come up with. It just seems totally implausible.
Okay, there's a lot here. So
yeah,
here's
sorry.
one of the things. No, don't be sorry at all. There's nothing to be sorry about. Here's one thing that I think that's interesting that I've been thinking a lot about recently. Because there's a question of like how much, like, you can't force yourself to believe something, but obviously
Right.
like you have some control over your actions. Obviously, we're not getting into the free will debate. But one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is like Pascal's wager, and not in the sense of like sometimes it gets portrayed as like belief. Like it's better to believe than not. Like I think it's gonna be hard for you to just like wake up one day and be like, okay, I'm just gonna believe this. But one of the things I've been wondering is like, what if you just commit to it? So like one of the things, I'm not talking about you personally, but unless maybe I am, but like thinking about like Pascal, one of the things he talked about is I believe it was him, and like here's a quote I pulled up where he's talking about like, what do you do like if you want to like say attain faith? Since he's talking about whoever he's talking about is someone that wants to like be a Christian, but just can't put all the dots together, can't like see it as true. And he says like, what can you do to cure yourself of your unbelief? He said, learn of those who have been bound like you and who now stake all their possessions. These are the people who know the way which you would follow and who are cured of an ill which you would be cured. Follow the way by which they began, by acting as if they believed, taking the holy water, having masses said, etc. So what's interesting to me is what Pascal says is like, say, like maybe you don't like have that like intellectual belief in like the gospel or something like that, but you can sure live like it. And it seems like consistent with like New Testament teaching, where like it's not just about like having the intellectual proposition that God exists. That seems pretty obvious if you like. I think most religions would agree. Like it's not just about like believing, like having that proposition in your mind, but it's about how you live with your life, how you express yourself. So I think there's something to that where it's like, well, it's not just about believing, but it's about living like it. It's like even if you don't believe it, you can still live like it and have hope that maybe things will pan out.
Yeah. So I've thought about that as well. And the paradox there is that why would you want to behave as if some proposition is true, even if you don't believe it, right? Like imagine me saying to you, listen, I know you can't convince yourself that the earth is flat. Like I know that that's just like really hard for you to believe. Like you can't just like choose to start believing that the earth is flat tomorrow. But listen, man, like why don't you just try? Just like, spend the rest of your life living as if the earth is flat. That seems weird. That would feel weird to you because you're going, why would I do that unless I already believed intellectually that the earth is flat? Like there's no, so it's almost like paradoxically, I would have to believe intellectually that Christianity is true in order to think that it was that I had a good reason to treat Christianity as if it were true, even though I didn't believe it. Right? It's like a catch-22. It doesn't. It almost, not, this isn't right, but it almost kind of begs the question. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm tracking with you. So I think what I would say is I'm thinking about like, why don't I just like go join a bunch of like flat earth groups and like go get on my boat and prove that the earth is flat and I fall off in outer space and die or whatever.
Right.
And like for me, it's like, I'm thinking I'm like, that's going to give me to little to no like value for me personally. Like, what am I going to gain from like living that way? And it seems like it's not a lot. Maybe
Okay.
like if I'm not convinced, yeah, go
I
ahead.
take your point. So let me control for that objection and just say instead of flat Earth, because there's no, you're right. There's no reward promised for believing in a flat Earth, right?
Yeah.
Instead of flat Earth, let's just say Islam, right?
Yeah. There
Like,
we
why
go.
don't you
That's
just,
good.
if Islam is true, then clearly, there's a reward for it and there's a huge punishment for not believing it. So why not just like, why don't you, Zach, just, fake it till you make it, and I think you would hear that and go, right, but I would need a reason to think that Islam is true before I had a reason to think that I should act as if Islam is true, right? I already believe Christianity is true. I already think that my reasons for my belief in Christianity are good, solid reasons. So why would I undertake this exercise unless I actually had a better reason for thinking Islam is true, and I am just having some kind of emotional block.
Yeah.
The paradox remains for me.
I mean, I would say you got to choose the path that I think would give you that you think has the best chance of giving you like eternal bliss or something like that. So if you think it's Islam, then go ahead, I guess. Obviously, like I don't think it's Islam. Like I'm not a Muslim. But like for me, that's kind of like what I would say is like if you think that like Islam is going to give you the best chance at eternal bliss, then okay, good for you. I mean, I think you're wrong, but like, yeah, I mean,
But
what do you think of that?
is that the right way to live? I mean, is the right way to live to do whatever you can to maximize your chances of eternal bliss, even if it comes at other costs that you really value? I'm not so sure that eternal bliss is the most important thing to me, especially when it's not a guarantee of eternal bliss, but it's, let's say I think that, and I do think this, that eternal bliss is in fact an oxymoron, right? Like I don't actually think that there's nothing can be blissful for eternity, right? Now, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe that's a failure of my, primate brain's ability to conceive of what something like heaven would actually be like. That's all fine. But for now, let's say that I don't, I think that the highest chances are, it's most probable that there's no such thing as eternal bliss that is available to try to work for, right? So how much of my other values am I really willing to sacrifice on the 0.0001% chance I think that there's an eternal bliss and that I want that? I'm not sure that's rational, actually. I'm not sure it's rational to pursue that, because it requires me to sacrifice the values that I do have, which I think are important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm tracking with you. Like I'm thinking, like say there's like a 0.00001% chance that if I run out of this room right now and shut my not my Chromebook, my laptop, and like everything I have, and buy a plane ticket to go to, I don't know, Bolivia right now and go climb like the highest mountain in Bolivia. Like if I do that, like that's going to give me eternal bliss. Like that doesn't seem very rational for me to do that if there's a 0.0001% chance of that
Right.
happening. So I'm tracking with you there. Obviously,
And
I
I
would
may
say
be, by the
you
way,
just
to be clear, like I may be incorrect that there's a 0.0001% chance of that happening. But if I believe that right now, what am I to do with that information? What am I to do about that belief of mine? That if I'm convinced that's true, since I can't choose my beliefs, right?
Yeah. So again, like back to the commitment thing, but I would say something like what I'm trying to get at is like when I think of like the Christian view of heaven, and I'm not super familiar with like other religions, like I've read the Quran or like the Book of Mormon or things like that. But like I'm not super familiar with their theologies. When I think about like Christian, like what should I be aiming doing? It's not like for me, it's not like, hey, say your prayer, make sure you don't mess up, and like then you'll be in heaven and you'll get taken care of and be like a nice like pushy resort or something. You'll just chill out and you'll be good. It's to me, it's like it's more of like a virtue thing, or like as a Christian, I'm trying to become more and more like God, so like Christ. So like, what could be more valuable than that? Like if I could like pursue like a better path for me as like as a human being, as a moral person, like to me that seems more valuable than anything else. So if Christianity gives a path that I see as like the most plausible path towards that, then that's something good, something I should pursue.
Right. Okay. But if you were like, but you already accept Christianity as a
Mm-hmm.
true proposition, or at least a true set of propositions. What if
Mm-hmm.
you're someone like me who still cares about being an ethical a person in the world as I can be? But I don't think that Christianity is the only or even best way to do that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what am I to do in that situation? Which is the situation I'm currently in, right? Like I care about ethics, I care about morality, I care about living the good life, whatever that may end up being. But it's not clear to me. While it is true that Christianity certainly offers a means to achieve that, it's not the only offer on the table, and it may
Mm-hmm.
not be the best offer on the table, right? It also comes at a cost of having to believe a whole bunch of things, propositions that I have a hard time believing are true, right? When I could still have that pursuit without that cost of believing
Mm-hmm.
a whole bunch of things that I find implausible. So what is someone like me to do there?
So I think there's something good. I was trying to like just draw this out because it helps me think about it. So I see what you're saying. Like there's this question of like, hey, like, you could say like you could try to commit to the Christian thing, but maybe there's like these teachings there or something that I don't like that Christianity has because I don't think they're the best path for like humanity or for myself or for my family or things like that. So it's like, hey, like why don't I pursue like what I think is like the good life? And for me, I think there's one thing. I think it's gonna get into the question of like, well, like I believe in God, you don't. But like for me, like what Christianity would have, or like you could say the same thing about like Islam or Judaism,
Right.
like insert your religion. And that's what I'm saying. Commit to what you think is most plausible is like a theistic, like a perfect being. So I would say that like the good life or something like that doesn't have that. I don't want to say reward because I don't like the idea of saying like you're just rewarded for, because I think there's something like very selfless about fundamental nature of love. It's not
Yeah.
like just like
Well, and
self-serving.
also something like love, which is almost certainly a part of the good life, whatever that is its own reward, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
love, we don't love, well, we don't have to, I guess I should say, we don't have to love because there's a reward for being loving.
Yeah.
We love because loving is rewarding, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the things like I pursue and like I care about most dearly, they're not things that I love just to like get some sort of like reward from it. I just love them because I want to love them because it's beautiful. Like it's a good thing.
Right.
So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So where
I
were
think
we?
I think we just agreed.
Christians and atheists can't agree though. So like
No, that's against the rules. No, we
that's
can't do
what
that.
2018 or 2019
Yeah.
Zach would be like, wait, what are you doing? Um,
Well, I do. Okay, so let me pose this to you, just because we're kind of like dancing on the edge of this, and maybe I'll throw. I never do this, but I'll throw out like a provocative kind of thought experiment.
okay.
Um, um, a lot of there's an apologetic. I don't know if you would sign off on this, but there's a kind of apologetic way of thinking which says that if you believe in God, at least if you believe in the afterlife, there is at least an incentive for selflessness, like true selflessness, like true
Mm-hmm.
self-sacrifice, right? You can, there's a way of, if you believe in God and heaven and or hell, then there's actually a way for you to live in the world where your self-interests are not the most important thing on earth, right? Like you can,
Mm-hmm.
there are good reasons for you to sacrifice your own interests for the interests of others. Whereas if there is no God and no afterlife, it's really hard to argue that there are good reasons for self-sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not sure how if you follow that line of reasoning, it sounded like maybe there's something you were saying implied that if you're really interested in the good life, if you're really interested in being ethical, then belief in God or an afterlife gives you a kind of foundation for that you wouldn't have otherwise. Does that sound like a reasonable sort of apologetic move to you?
Okay, that's good, Scott. I wouldn't go the full like 9 yards of saying that like Christianity gives you like life purpose and meaning, and atheism like you don't get any of that. Like you can't have any of that. So I wouldn't go
No,
the
not yet.
full
Not even
way.
all that. Just
I mean, I would say there's something to it. I'm still like hashing these things out just like as we're talking right now, which is why I think this is so great and hopefully helpful for people listening. But for me, like I think about Christianity, like it gives you the sense of like, I'm still like, this is the edge of my thinking, but it's like a way of the good life for me in a Christian perspective is like a self-sacrificial life that allows you to like love and serve God, which is the ultimate good. Something like that. So I think on atheism, like you can't have that. Like you could still like have self-sacrifice, which is a good thing. Like I think of Pat Tillman, like the NFL player that fought in Iraq or Afghanistan, like he sacrificed his life for America, which is a good thing. And like he's an atheist, but it's like, I don't think you can't have everything the theist has. And I think that what the theist has is better. I guess that's kind of the way I would hash it out, if that makes sense, Scott.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll tell you where I was going with that. The thought that is always percolating in my mind when it comes to, the afterlife and ethics and morality and incentives, is that one of the problems that I see with the afterlife is that it actually does the opposite. It removes the ability for self-sacrifice. If self-sacrifice gets you an eternal reward, then it's not self-sacrifice, it's actually self-interest. And so the hypothetical that I pose to a Christian in this case would be, well, does your Christianity give you a reason for true self-sacrifice, which would be something like, would you give up your salvation for me? Like that would be true self-sacrifice. Would you give up heaven? Would you go to hell, or whatever version of hell is most plausible, so that I could go to heaven? Right. Mm-hmm. And I think most Christians, if they're being kind of honest, would say, no, I can't, that's a bit much. And of course that, the wheels start turning and you can give a lot of kind of ad hoc reasons for why, maybe it wouldn't be just it wouldn't be just for you to go to heaven and for me to go to hell, because, or it's moot because God would never offer me that, that opportunity to sacrifice myself for you anyway. But whatever the case, I think a Christian posed that question, could recognize themselves trying to come up with reasons why they shouldn't have to make that sacrifice in the first place, instead of saying, yes, that would be a noble example of self-sacrifice that my worldview incentivizes, or not even incentivizes, because there can't be an incentive by definition for self-sacrifice, right? So, and yet what's funny is, if Christianity is true, an atheist is capable of self-sacrifice, like true self-sacrifice, in a way that a Christian is not, because of their propositional beliefs. And that's like a weird, trippy irony to me, that's part of this dialectic.
Okay, so there's a lot here.
Yeah, what do you think of that?
Well, I'll tell you first what 10-year-old Zach would think about this, because I used to think about this question a lot. I was like, what do I do if I get up to heaven and like I have my ticket right there to get into heaven, and there's someone going to hell? Like, what am I going to do? And when I thought when I was 10 years old, I was like, I'll do a lot of good things for people, but I'm not giving them my ticket. That's what I thought when I was like 10 years old.
I'm not sure I would either. It's hard.
What 21-year-old Zach is going to say now is, I don't think that scenario is actually like possible, because it gets into a little bit of my eschatology, but like I'm going to adhere to something like C.S. Lewis's version of hell, or something like that, where the gates of hell are going to be locked from the inside, or like annihilation, or things like this. Like the people in heaven are the people that want to serve and follow God. The people in hell are going to be people that don't. They have something more important than God that they're serving or following, or something like that. So I know it's kind of a cop-out answer, but for me, that's kind of like, what would you do if God told you to commit? What would you do if God told you to do something that's like morally wrong? And I would say, well, God's never going to tell me to do that. So like in a similar way, I would say like with the tick, because God's a perfect being. Obviously, if God's not perfect, then that question could crack open. In a similar way, I'd say that like with your scenario with like letting someone else into heaven in your place, I'm going to say that scenario is not possible because, God wills all people to be saved. And there's no one that's going to hell that would have been like, oh man, if I just like heard the Kalam cosmological argument, everything would be different. Like, I don't think that's how that's going to work.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Well, let me try to control for that concern and create a hypothetical. Let me spin a story for you that might make something like this scenario more plausible, right? Let's say you die and you're met with God. You're face to face with God in some form or another. And God says, listen, here's the thing. You've learned about Jesus Christ, my son, your whole life, right? You know about his sacrifice. You know that he lived a perfect life. You know that everything he did was done out of love, and love for everyone, even his enemies. You know the story. You know the morality of it. You know what I've been trying to instill in you your entire life. Here's your test. The test is, and this is for every human being, you now have a chance to be like Jesus, right? Being Christ-like is the point. And what's the one thing that Christ did? He went to hell so that sinners, people who don't deserve it, could go to heaven. Now is your opportunity to do the same thing. And so there's a kind of theological, this may not be true, but I'm creating a hypothetical where there's a theological reason, there's a real test here. And maybe it's a test, maybe it's not, maybe it's just the way that it has to end. But, God says, can you be like Jesus? So here you go. Are you going to go to hell so that this atheist, this sinning atheist, can be saved? Again, that's, even for me, even if I were a Christian, I want to believe that I would, do that, but I don't know. But there's nothing about Christianity that actually gives me that incentive. Or not. Again, I keep using the word incentive, but it's by definition there is no incentive, right? Because there can't be any reward for it if it's actual, true self-sacrifice. So if I pose the question that way, how do you react to that?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot here. First thing I was thinking about like the incarnation. So I was thinking about like under the Christian story, like we have a similar scenario, not the same, but similar as to like what you were talking about. Like we believe, like I believe, not we, I believe in like the second person of the Trinity, the Son, like taking the flesh, the person of Jesus, and then undergoing like suffering and pain and death and, descending in hell, these things, for the sins of the world, for my sins, your sins, things like that. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. So then again, with your scenario, I'm going to wonder, like, in question, like part of my background knowledge as a theist is like, God is perfect. It's like, God's not going to God's not going to have me do something that's like morally wrong, something that's imperfect. And I'm going to say with like that atheist, let's say like with the eternal conscious torment that's in hell, what I would say is the only way they'd end up in hell is if that's where they wanted to be. So there's no point in me say like going to hell or dying, like whatever you want to say for them. Because if they're going to be given that chance to whoever the atheist in hell is, they want to be in hell. Like that's what they want to be. And it may not be expressed. Like, I'm sure you would not want to say like, I want to be in hell. But I'm thinking more of like the Lewis great divorce scenario where he's going to bring different people up to like the gates of heaven. And like, I remember one of them was like, I think it was the father of a girl who's murdered. And like the murderer and his daughter are sitting there like in heaven. And he's right there. And the bus driver, whoever, it's been years since I've read this, but they're like, hey, come on to the dad, like come join us in heaven. It's going to be a great time. And there's going to be like love and happiness and all these things. And he's like, but he's there. I can't do that. And it's something that held him back. So I would say something similar to like there's no, when we get to like that eschaton, it's not like there's going to be someone that really wants to be on the other side. And it's not going to be expressed in the way of like the person saying like, I want to be in hell. But it's going to be saying, I want this instead of that bliss or that fellowship there. Does that make sense? Am I speaking clearly? Am I confusing you?
Yeah. Well, let me ask a question and then I'll tell you if it makes sense. So why couldn't Jesus have done the same thing? Why couldn't Jesus have said, listen, anybody that goes to hell wants to be there anyway. Why am I sacrificing myself, God?
Well, it's going to depend on your theory of the atonement, obviously. So if you're something like penal substitution, you're going to say like this had to happen. And there's all other kind of theories of the atonement. I don't have my mind exactly made up on the atonement. But it's going to be like whatever your atonement theory is. That's probably going to be your answer, and that's something I'm still like very much fleshing out and don't have a lot of detail on. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's just shift to, this is fun if you're having fun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, let's explore the idea that someone like me wants to be in hell. Can you
Okay.
unpack that more?
Yeah. So again, I'm not like totally committed to this position. But this is for me, if eternal conscious torment is true, this is the only plausible model that I see as possible. I don't really even lean
Oh, I
towards this
see.
view
Yeah.
because I'd hold to something like annihilationism. I see as more
Right.
plausible because I think what I'm about to defend is going to have some issues. That like I think it's something that like I'm like, this is plausible, but I don't think it's likely. But I would say is like something like if eternal conscious torment is true, this is really the only model that I see as something that is at least a little bit defensible. And it's Lewis's model where like the gates of hell are locked on the inside, and say that
Yeah.
person that's in hell, like they want something or they love something that's not God more than God. So like it's loving, like it can even be like being like a good like father or mother, or being like a good person or something. Like if there's something that they love that's more important to them than like God itself, it's eventually going to destroy you because that can't bring you eternal happiness. So I'm still working this model out, but something like that is what I would say is the starting place with how I try to explain that.
Okay. So you know, what if, okay, I have a 6-year-old son, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he has a pet cat. And let's say that cat, fell into the lake, and my son jumped into the lake after the cat because, this cat, his pet cat is just the most important thing to him. It's more important than
Mm-hmm.
his relationship with me, even. Right.
Yeah.
And my son, basically dives into this lake, and he doesn't know how to swim, and he's going to drown because he wants to be with his cat. He wants to be with his cat more than he wants to be with me. Am I a good parent for letting him do that? For me going, kind of going, well, hey, it's what he wants. If he doesn't want to be with me, if he doesn't want to live, that's his choice. Or would a good loving parent, I mean, if I love my son, what is the loving act, right? Do I let my son do that? So the analogy here is, why is God letting someone allow themselves to be tortured for eternity just because they don't love the right thing or want the right thing? God has all the knowledge, we don't. God has all the wisdom, we don't. God has all the morality, we don't. Right? That a parent's job is to know more and to know better. And to look out for our interests, right? And to teach us and correct us and train us, not to go, well, you made your choice, tough shit, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this idea that the doors of hell are locked from the inside, it is a fact about human nature that people are really not good at knowing what they really want. They're not good at knowing what would make them happiest. And parents, and especially children, are not good at this, right? If my
Mm-hmm.
son could play video games all day long and do absolutely nothing else, he should. And yet I know, even though he's going to cry when I make him put the game down, it's better for him. And I don't care what he wants. I care about what's best for him because I love him so much. And so
Mm-hmm.
in a way, I'm causing him to do something he doesn't want to do out of love. The relationship between humans and God should or would be any different from that, right? So let's say I'm in hell, the doors are locked from the inside because for whatever reason there's something I value more than I value my relationship with God, but this will cause me infinite suffering, right? Infinite suffering. How is God anything but a failure of a parent for not going, I don't care what you think you want, you need to be here with me in heaven?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that would push me towards like a non like eternal conscious torment view. I mean, there's some
Okay.
things you could say
Yeah.
in defense. There's a really good video that got put out a few weeks ago. It was on, I think, the no, it was on Christian Idealism's channel. But it was like Kyle and their Christian Idealism, John Buck, and Dry Apologist, Caleb Cumberland, and they were talking about like Catholic perspectives on hell, and they all were like talking about different models that would be something like an eternal model of hell. That are a lot different than what we think. So I'd
Yeah, yeah.
recommend pointing people towards that, where like you could maybe like have like a view and hash it out differently. But like for all I want to say for this point is like, that's one of the reasons, like, I think you're onto something where like, it's hard for me to see like an eternal version of hell. Cause to me, it's like, it'd be better for that person to just like not exist, than to like eternally be suffering. And
Yeah.
like, I know there's like I don't want to be like, oh, he's right. Like, I'm just saying like, you're onto something and it pushes me. Like, obviously Christians can say something in response. And I know you're not.
Yeah.
Like,
I completely
claiming to have all
acknowledge
the
there are
answers.
answers to what I'm saying here,
Mhm.
but again, so even if we put, eternal conscious torment aside, and we take a view of like annihilationism, it's still, then I think that you still have a problem of non-belief of sorts. But the problem just shifts from, a problem of justice, a problem of moral. It's less of a moral problem and more of a logical problem of, if you really believe that God loves us and wants a relationship with us, it just doesn't make a lot of sense that we wouldn't at least come factory installed with certainty that God exists. And then you get to make your choice as to whether you want that relationship or not. I grant the premise that it's not very loving to force somebody to love you back, right? I totally grant that premise, but I don't grant the premise that would entail that not forcing them to love you back is the same as not even letting them know you exist, right? There's a kind of leap there between those two that the gap of which I don't think has been filled to my satisfaction in the responses I've seen. Did that rambling mess of a response any sense?
No, I'm tracking with you. I do
Okay.
think one of the things I've been thinking about a couple of times, like during this conversation, is I do think, I don't know if we're factory installed with belief in God, but I do think like belief in God is a lot more common than we realize. And obviously, if you want to get into like specific like religions, can get trickier. But if you're just like, hey, like there's a God, like, hey, there's something more than like the material universe, and like this. Most people today and most people across the time are going to be like, yeah, I agree with that. It's really, and Emerson brought this up in his Devil's Advocate debate. Like, atheism is a very like new and not very common phenomena. Doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means like, hey, there's a lot more theists than people realize. Like, it's something like in 2050, like 86% of the world is going to be theist still in 2050, or adhere to a religious tradition. That's probably a better way of describing it.
Two thoughts about that. One is how much that matters depends on how much it matters that you get the right religion, right? You're worshiping the right God, when it comes to your salvation, right?
That's going to then depend on like your theology. Like, I'd probably go to something like I talked about earlier with like C.S. Lewis in The Last Battle.
Yeah. Okay. So okay. Barring that, I think the reason I would say that I don't think that's a mark against the inference I'm making here is that we're talking about, this is not triage, right? We're talking about moral perfection and omnipotence and omniscience, right? So I think it's the problem of non-belief would be just as robust a problem if there were one non-believer in the whole world, in all of history. There was just one non-believer. You'd still have the same problem, right? If there were one person that God just didn't reveal themselves to, or didn't, that they're one person that suffered the cost of not having a relationship with God, given that God wants a relationship and loves that person, and wants that person to know he exists. I think the problem still remains, because a morally perfect God would have no more tolerance for one person failing to be saved than for 7 billion or so.
So I think, so for me, like, that's one of the big things like pushing me away from like any sort of like super hard determinism. Like, I think like under Calvinism, the idea, it's hard for me to see how God just creates people and they're just like going to hell, like that's it, end of story.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would hold to something like God creates us with freedom, because freedom is a good thing to have. So like in that kind of scenario, we make it a little bit more like things you can explain stuff with. If you say like, hey, there's this idea of like freedom, which is a very good thing. So like God can't ultimately like force you one way or the other, and like you got to make that choice on your own, and you got to recognize like, and, there's things like general revelation, like you talk about like sin, and like I think to some degree you could say like everyone on, like there's things like Romans 1, and I'm not gonna be like, oh, everyone just hates God, because I think that's a terrible way of thinking about it. But I think that like you can say like there is something like I think most people have some sort of sense of like right and wrong, which I would say points to God. Obviously, you probably disagree, but again, I don't know where I'm going. I'm just kind of rambling too.
No, that's cool. So I see it as that there's two distinct issues here. One is, God doesn't want to force us to love him and be in a relationship with him, right? That's a higher value, like that, the free will, right, is the sort of higher good here. Free will is more important than God, putting a gun to our head and saying, you have to love me, right? That's but the exercise of that free will is almost moot if we don't know that the choice exists, right? And that's the part that I'm arguing for. I'm saying if we don't even know that there is a God, if we don't come, quote unquote, factory installed with a certain amount of certainty that God exists, he's there, he's available, he wants a relationship with us, and he loves us, and now we get to make a free choice as to whether or not to enter into that relationship. That all makes perfect sense to me. What doesn't make sense to me is, well, I don't want to force you to love me, so I'm not even going to let you know I'm available to be loved, right? That is the part. So there's a difference between God not forcing us to love him and God not even making his existence known in the first place. And that second thing is I think what the problem of non-belief is, because you at least have to know that God exists and is available for a relationship before you can reject that relationship. Anybody who says that I am rejecting a relationship with God, I think is misspeaking, right? It's not a relationship with God I'm rejecting the proposition that there is a God to have a relationship with in the first place. I would have to believe that God exists in order to reject a relationship with God. All I'm rejecting is a claim made by fallible human beings, right? And so those two things are very separate to me, and I think this is fundamental to what the problem of non-belief is, or so I see it.
So this is one of the things that I thought about a couple times as we've been talking. It's really helpful. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah.
And we only have like 10 minutes left before I have to dip out,
Okay,
which is
cool.
kind of sad.
Yeah, cool.
But so very briefly, I wonder, like, is there a certain credence level that you need to like commit to like following, like, say, a particular religious tradition? Because like I think we talked about, like, we agreed that there is no like slam dunk argument on either side. Like there's no like you're not like a 0% chance of God atheist. I'm not 100% chance like intellectually believing in God. So like what kind of credence do you need to like say like to commit to Christianity? Like is 70%? What about 69.9 or 68? Or like if you're 50.1, are you good? But 49.9, you're not saved. So for me, like I have a hard time thinking about like credences. To me, it's not just committing.
But this is like this is part of the problem of non-belief as I see it. We shouldn't even be talking about credence right now. It should just be a known thing. I mean, if God exists and loves us and wants a relationship with us, I can't think of a single morally justifiable reason why credence level should even be a thing. We should all just know that God exists and is available for a relationship. And when I say should, I don't mean prescriptively, I mean descriptively, like deductively, like we should. It logically follows, I'm saying, that we would all at least know that God exists, loves us, and is available for this relationship.
So here's what I wonder is, I'm about to debunk your entire world. Just kidding. Just kidding. But like for me, like, okay, so thinking of like, would there be any reason for God to like remain some degree hidden? I want to say yes, because I think that it's good for people to, and this is something I'm just coming up with. I don't have this all fleshed out, but I think it's good for people to work and live together. I think God's hiddenness can open up some of those doors. So like thinking about like what I'm going to do is I need to get ready and I'm going to like a Christian group after this conversation's over. And one of the things that we have there is a chance to like talk together about like our lives, our journeys, faith, things like this, a place where like we can confess sin, which I think is super important because, you know, if Christian God exists, then he's holy. And if I'm sinful, then those are things that I can improve on and become more like Christ and God. And But like for me, like God's hiddenness, I think would allow for like that sense of like cooperation, like even conversations like this, like if there was if we all had 100% certainty, this conversation wouldn't exist. And I think this conversation is a good thing. So I would say that like, what I would say is that cooperation is a good thing. And if we all had like 100% like credence God exists, then what point would there be in like working together on things like this, or like Christians like fellowshipping together, things like questions? It's just, it seems to me that hiddenness kind of opens up some of these doors.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
So we can't agree on everything, is what you're saying?
I know, God, what a conversational failure. We didn't walk away completely converging on everything. Yeah, I think the idea, well, I'm not sure it's true that this conversation is valuable because of the uncertainty that God exists, right? That is why this conversation is valuable. If we knew that God existed, I'm not sure that this conversation would be as valuable, but we wouldn't need to preserve the value of this conversation. We'd be having other valuable conversations if that were true. So I just think the counterfactual doesn't really, I don't think the counterfactual is self-consistent there. We don't need this conversation to be valuable. We just need this conversation to be valuable given the background fact that God is hidden, right? But if God weren't hidden, it would just be the case that different things would be valuable. I don't think this conversation is intrinsically valuable. It's valuable because of facts about the world.
Well, maybe a misunderstanding, but like, couldn't uncertainty be a good thing? So like, think like you're an actor. Like, say you went up to your director tomorrow, whenever you go back into work, you're like, hey, I had this idea for the show. We're all gonna be happy. There's gonna be no issues, no problems. Everything is good to go. We're done, and we can just film every day for the rest of forever, and everyone's gonna be happy. We're gonna have amazing ratings. Surely he's gonna think like, maybe like, Scott, what are you doing, dude? You're a little crazy right now. Like, surely like having like plot and diversity and questions, like, isn't that better to have some uncertainty rather than just like a world that's like, for limited finite creatures, and there's a problem with heaven. Isn't some uncertainty like a good thing to have?
Well, okay, but context matters, right? So imagine me saying to you, do you have you don't have kids or anything, right? Or
No.
do you have parents? Yeah, obviously you
I do have parents.
Okay, so what if I said to you, like, hey Zach, come on, isn't a little uncertain? Shouldn't you be a little uncertain that your mom exists? Like, do you really need, like, wouldn't it be a little bit better if you weren't totally sure you even had a mom? Like, wouldn't that be just a little bit better? Like, wouldn't that make your relationship with your mom more valuable if you weren't sure she even existed in the first place? If you weren't just totally sure, if you were just had some doubts as to whether your mom even existed, wouldn't that be better? I mean, that if somebody said that to you, you would think they were crazy, right? Like that's almost a nonsense question. And that is the context in which we're talking about certainty and uncertainty here. Uncertainty is really good. Uncertainty is really important. And you can have, there's a cornucopia of uncertainty you can still have. I love my wife, right? I know my wife exists. I see her every day. I have a relationship with her. And yet there are many things about her that are still mysterious to me, that I'm still uncertain about. I don't always know what she's thinking. I don't always know why she chooses what she does. We could have that kind of relationship with God, but at least we would have a relationship. The kind of certainty I'm talking about is the certainty that is necessary to have a relationship in the first place. Once you have that loving relationship, add all the uncertainty you like. That's healthy. It's good. But that's not the uncertainty I'm talking about.
Well, I think to have a relationship with God, like, you don't have to have that complete certainty that he exists. And I think some uncertainty is a good thing. So that's where I'm probably gonna.
And that depends on your soteriology, so cool. Yeah.
Well, I think I know they're out there, like precepts and stuff, but I don't think there's many people like Christians out there that would say like, I have 100% certainty that like God exists or something like that. And like for me, like I could say like I get a lot wrong, but I am 100% committed to Christianity. And I'm not saying like I mess up so much, but like that's what I'm committed to. And I don't have like the 100% intellectual credence that God exists to match that. I mean, it's pretty high, but like I'm still like I can be committed and not have like complete certainty. So
yeah, well, analogously though, I can say in earnest that I don't have 100% certainty that my wife exists. For example, I could be living in a computer simulation. I could be delusional. But what matters here is that I believe my wife exists, right? This is not something that's keeping me up at night. And I think it should be the same way with any God that loves us and wants a relationship with us. In theory, is anyway. So that's the a sort of mapping of the problem of non-belief as I see it.
Well, I mean, I think this has been good. I don't know. I feel like we're kind of in a good spot to
man, totally
wrap up. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up here?
No, I just really want to thank you. I feel like a lot of interviews, conversations like this, they tend to, it's a little black or white. Like either somebody is lobbing me softballs, like like just the least challenging, questions possible, and even if it's a Christian and that they're just afraid to like challenge me on anything, or it's a full-on like almost semi-hostile debate, and I just want to thank you for this, because you weren't just interviewing me, you were challenging me, you were like posing questions to me that are difficult to answer, but it was like really fun and friendly and amicable, and I just man, I appreciate you, so thank you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you too, and I hope for people listening, like at least for me, like maybe Scott's just like way smarter than me. You definitely have a better. I need to get a beard. That's one of my biggest struggles in life, Scott. Is I can't grow a beard because like I have this, but it doesn't connect, so it just kind of looks weird. So then I just kind of stay with this double because I just don't know what to do. But what I was trying to say is like I appreciate this conversation, because for me, like I'm on the edge of my thinking here, like thinking about these questions of like hell or like soteriology or like the atonement. Like these are things I'm really thinking about like in my own life, and I don't have it all figured out. And like for the Christians, like I hope you don't like get scared and like call me heretic and that stuff, because I'm trying, like for me, like as a Christian, like I am like ultimately like subservient to scripture, and like I want to affirm like major creeds and things like this. But for me, it's also important to like be open and upfront and like saying like, hey, I don't have this like whole question of hell all figured out. Like there's a lot I don't understand, and like I want to be faithful, and I'm gonna be like if I was put in a position where I had to affirm like some sort of form of eternal conscious torment, like I guess I would have to do it, and I'd try to defend like a Lewis version of hell because that seems plausible. It's just, to me, I think like within Christendom, I think there's room for like these questions basically. So I wanted to say this to all my Christians, like don't worry about me, I'm good. But I love this conversation because it just pushes me, and you made me better today, and that's why I loved it. So thank you, Scott.
Thanks, man. Back at you. I share the same aspirations in terms of just building a robust, defensible worldview that I can live with. That's what we all want at the end of the day. So and we help each other make our worldviews stronger and better. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Yeah, and you can check Scott's channel out. It'll be like added or there'll be some way you can follow Scott. I have to figure that out,
Something,
or you can check out the soap opera on CBS. So when it's all just like the same thing every time, please, I'll send you my address for my checks in the mail when you have the best idea ever. So
it's very repetitive, so get ready for that. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. God bless.